Hi all, I thought we could have a look at Ivanchuk versus Svidler. Svidler on the roof, one of the decisive games in the Tal Memorial. So it's great they're celebrating Tal, they're giving credit to Tal with these Tal Memorial tournaments. It's a really strong tournament, 2 decisive games so far. So I thought let's have a look at one of them. So Ivanchuk playing white against Svidler, who's a Gruenfeld expert. And I thought this was slightly unusual, but it is slightly less popular than Queen B3, this next move, E3. So what does E3 do? It blocks in the bishop, okay. It supports the pawn, so if black wants to capture, then white's able to recapture. So almost treating it like, well, quietly. But after bishop G7, we have this move Queen B3 anyway. And I have played this myself in Over the Board sometimes. It's the idea, I think, is to get black to release the tension and try and get a central pawn majority going once this pawn's removed. Now here with this move order, it seems Svidler wasn't interested in taking on C4 now. He played E6, just reinforcing his D5 pawn. And we have a curious move actually now, Queen A3. I don't remember seeing this position before. It's stopping black castling. Does black want to play bishop F8, lose time with bishop F8? Does white have a useful move if black plays bishop F8, or are they going to repeat positions? Just quickly engine check that actually. That's something that's just occurred to me now. So say black did want to be difficult. Sorry, just and persist with going here. I think that would be fine. If black wanted to do that, then he could. But no, Svidler played A5, and we're going to see later. You know, Svidler's trying to create counterplay and activity, but sometimes at a positional cost for longer-term factors. And one longer-term factor we're going to see later is this pawn. If that's a liability. Assume it's a liability and it's lost, then white will get a passed A pawn. Just bear that in mind, that if this pawn can be targeted more easily, it's sometimes dangerous for the opponent to create a passed pawn out of that. So knight F3, and now a kind of Shigurin type move, knight C6, blocking in the C pawn. So if black wanted to intensify the central tension, well, it was discouraged anyway with this queen cutting across the diagonal and controlling C5. But it creates you know, dangerous threats like knight b4, crude ones like knight c2 check, which need to be handled. So white cannot, it seems, white has to be careful tactically. He plays actually bishop d2, which means perhaps rook c1 could be the answer if knight b4, among other things. But actually knight b4, it wasn't rook c1 here, it was actually queen check. And curiously, I mean, this is the funny thing about this game with Ivanchuk's play. It seems a bit strange to me because now we have Queen B3. You know, the Queen moves in the opening here. You know, if we track them, Queen B3 was originally played, then Queen A3, then Queen A4 check. And then back to B3. I mean, how many club players play like this? This is a bit odd, isn't it? I mean, I just find it personally a little bit odd so far, this game. Black does release the tension in the centre. Maybe he's annoyed by all of Ivanchuk's queen moves so far. And he puts his other bishop striking across the diagonal, which looks nice and active, controlling, you know, key central squares. A3, and now knight Bd5. So who stands better here? It looks as though e4 is completely out of the question because, you know, knight takes, then knight takes e4. So the bishop's doing a good job eyeing these central squares, but it is a target for knight e5, and that's actually made use of now. Why can't white just pick up the light square bishop? Maybe Svidler, who must have a huge understanding of these types of Gruenfeld positions, feels that in this structure, giving up the light square bishop will be fully compensated by b-file pressure and activity, piece play, and maybe even this double pawn could be used to blast white's centre later with c5. Maybe that was the theory anyway. So it was tested. That theory was tested now. So he's inviting the loss of the light square bishop and the doubling of his pawns. So now Ivanchuk plays Qc2. He's going to be faced with an activity storm of pressure pretty soon. And it starts with c5, so the undoubling of the pawns, which means, okay, we've got isolated pawns, but black's got this b file to bear down with. And remember, he's got this potentially dangerous bishop, Gruenfeld bishop, as well. So knight e2, trying to calmly sort of weather the storm, reinforce d4. And now the other pawn comes now, because actually Ivanchuk didn't really like the look of ed. That does seem to be an isolated queen's pawn there, beautifully blockaded. So knight takes d4 seems better. But the knight can be kicked, but it goes to b5, which is slightly vulnerable in this position, it seems. Rook fc8. And if we look at black's position, he doesn't seem to have any problem pieces. White does have the bishop pair, and slightly more connected pawns. Yeah, these pawns are split, slightly more connected pawns. But, you know, black's position looks very, very playable. Rook fd1, and now knight g4. Pardon me. Okay, so what's this knight doing? Is there any sort of cheapos being threatened here? Possibly. This looks like a cheapo attacking f2 and h2 at the grandmaster level. This knight g4. So he's really just trying to provoke a weakness, knowing that actually the knight, if kicked now as it is, can go back to the centre and you know, liberate basically black's pawn now if he wanted to play c4, which he does. So it looks as though black's getting even more pressure in the position, and this knight seems actually disconnected now from this bishop, so a tactical target is going to have to retreat back, making white's position seemingly quite passive. Now, does the activity that black's generating come at a positional cost? Well, the first cost, as noted, was the bishop pair. White still has the bishop pair. But is there another cost? Is there like these vulnerable pawns? Out of these two pawns, it looks as though c4 is fully supported, but a5 might be the more vulnerable one. Okay, so there's two things to bear in mind for the compensation for black's activity. Bishop pair and slightly weak a pawn in particular. So rook ac1, and now black, perhaps he's deciding to use his activity to do something even more, to get his position even more aggressive. He plays h5. Okay, so what does h5 do? Maybe it's going to clamp down on the dark squares with h4 to discourage any g3s. Maybe later, even outrageously, maybe g5 might be on the cards, g4 for a hack attack. That's probably less likely here. White has reasonable things, and remember, white has the bishop pair, so black has to be careful moving too many pawns here. Knight c3 was played, and now actually knight b6, which really sort of shows, you know, black, that c4 pawn is the one pawn in white's territory, and it's fully reinforced and supported by black. So, I don't know, is Ivanchuk's position a little bit passive? What has he got going on here? He plays knight e4, and then we have knight d5, and then a sort of offer of a draw almost. Repetition of knights. Are they going to shake hands? Again, knight e4, knight d5. Are they going to shake hands now? Grandmaster draw, move 27. You know, is the position in balance? Probably, or maybe it's technically slightly better for white, but in practice, how is white going to exploit his bishop pair or black's very slightly weakened structure? Well, he changes his move now. He doesn't play knight c3. Ivanchuk goes for the win or something. He declares, I'm not going to have, it's not going to be easy to draw with me. He plays bishop e1. Okay, can these bishops do something later? Rook ab8. Black seems to have a very nice, active, lively position. King h1. What's this? King h1. Bit of prophylaxis against this diagonal, maybe being. Is he going to be tempted to move this pawn in the future? At the moment, it's impossible. These knights very aggressive, bearing down a lot of pressure on white's position between those two. Knight d7. Where are the knights going? Maybe it's going there to challenge white's central knight. Rook b1. In fact, it does. Knight c5. But hang on, isn't this a pawn sacrifice? Was this really needed? What's going on here? Can white snatch the c4 pawn? Did black need to do that? Let's check. Let's check this position. Engine check. Apparently engine is giving like c3 is about 0.11, or even f5 is coming into consideration, or knight e5. Again, just putting the knight back. Does black have to do anything? If he plays knight e5, it looks as though nothing's going on. But after this knight c5, this pawn was snatched and white seems to have technically an advantage. So what was the purpose, the intention of this gambit? Was it indeed knight a4? That would force here, 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 here. Is the white queen getting out of this somehow? That looks like a fairly drawish as well. Not sure. After bishop takes c4, Svidler, he didn't play knight a4. So if he wanted that tactic to suck the white queen into the position for repetition, well, he didn't use it. He plays knight b6 instead. And now white seems to be a reasonably good pawn up. Bishop b5, but black's still active. Knight d5, and now the bishop's supported even with a4. Not only supporting the bishop, but remember this slightly weakened pawn is now a fixed target for this bishop on e1. If that pawn goes, white will have a dangerous a pawn. So I'm not really sure. What was the idea here? Was it a positional idea? Trying to say that actually these two pawns are not important if black can establish a dark square blockade on b4. Maybe that's the point. Because knight a6 does look like a great dark square blockade with tempo on the queen. So Svidler gets his dark square blockade, which seems to actually more clearly pronounce this knight on d5 and this bishop being a bit useless, that now it's this horrible knight's guarding a5. So does black have any problems whatsoever here? It seems now some mysterious things happen. Rook bc1 and now knight c3. Of course it's probably unwise for black to take and he loses his knight, and this pawn maybe can go forward. So he just puts the pressure on c3 instead. Then we have knight d5. E takes d5, maintaining that knight on b4. Queen's on it. Couple of rooks come off. And now we have a slightly weakening move for the dark squares b3, but taking away that target pawn, you know, on b2. So rook c2, the queen can move somewhere. Now Svidler plays bishop c3, emphasizing, you know, to get rid of the bishop pair. Then of course, you know, he can sit on his dark square blockade, and this 2-to-1 pawn majority should mean absolutely nothing in theory. Okay, but there's a problem here with bishop c3. Rook c1. It seems to be fairly forcing black to do something now to defend that bishop. Queen f6, and now white plays queen f3, offering an exchange of queens, which might be a bad idea. If black goes to this ending, it probably spells a lot of trouble. Let's have a quick look at this. If queen takes f3, g takes, white seems to be clearly better. If bishop e5 just to protect the rook, taking, and now here bishop c3, and maybe, you know, white's quite a bit better. Okay, so Svidler wants to avoid that ending, so he plays queen e5. Okay, and now we have queen g3, offering a seemingly ugly pawn structure for white. if black wants to take on g3 now. And black seizes that opportunity. He's only a pawn down, doesn't look too bad. Bishop e5. Is white's still better? He still has the bishop pair in this ending. So these pair of bishops, what are they doing? Isn't this dark square blockade enough? Isn't white's damage on the pawn structure on the king side now also a compensation for black? King comes out to g1. Now we see knight c2 targeting these poor pawns. This e3 in particular can have be subject to a coordinated attack, it seems, which it is. Bishop b6, king comes to protect it, and now breaking open the position a bit more, removing this isolated queen pawn, which might be a target for the light square bishop at some point. It's dissolved with d4. Okay, it seems slightly risky to take e takes d4 here, because of knight takes d4. Looks visually good. Let's just check that one out as well. Is e takes d4 actually possible? Yes, apparently it would have been okay. This sort of position, bishop e3, and that's okay for white. But actually e4 was another good move that was chosen. E4, even allowing the discovered check. There's a YouTube video, actually, quite an interesting Ivanchuk YouTube video, that he allows a seemingly dangerous continuation from his opponent Korchnoi to make sure Korchnoi doesn't have counterplay. So it looks like 15 moves ahead, just to make sure, after all the checks and stuff, Korchnoi didn't have counterplay in the resulting position. So it seems here that this is a sort of an analogous invitation to a forcing sequence, with the resulting position with black not having too much counterplay. So he's inviting, it seems, this check, and he doesn't want an opposite coloured bishop scenario. He doesn't want to take here. I think that might be equal, even though white will gobble up another pawn. Let's just check that. Is this, what would an engine probably think white's better slightly, but there's a strong dark square blockade here, surely. So bishop d4, black probably is drawing this. It's less than half a pawn as well, technically, and white's pawns are doubled here anyway. So actually Ivanchuk doesn't want the opposite colour bishop scenario. He sacks a pawn. He sacks a pawn, so it's going to be equal after all that hassle. It's now equal on pawns, but qualitatively, what has happened now after knight takes g2 check, king d1, qualitatively we're left with that previous asset noted, this slightly vulnerable pawn. The time seems riper to try and target that pawn with a b4, but it's black's turn, and Svidler plays h4, and that's taken now. The knight goes over there. The knight doesn't seem that relevant for the a pawn. It's quite a way away, quite a distance. And now finally we have it, an exploitation finally in this equal material position now, with white still having the two bishops. White can take on d3 though to be a pawn up. In fact, is there anything wrong with taking on d3 here? Let's just check that one as well. b4 is given as the stronger move. If bishop takes d3, knight f3, this seems okay as well. Maybe just white was doing very well. Okay, but b4 is the stronger move. It's creating a real asset now for the white position. This a pawn, outside pass pawn, is a strong, dangerous weapon to use to win games. Seemingly, you know, simple, humble way of winning. You don't have to checkmate the opponent when you can just push the a pawn. So a5, bishop d4, and now this next move. How do we herd this pawn? One idea which springs to mind might be like this, or even maybe like this, or even maybe putting the bishop like here, then here, a6, then bishop b8 for a7. So there's various ways this bishop can cooperate to drag the pawn forward. The method chosen was bishop e7, and after f5, I believe Svidler actually resigned. He resigned here. I think he thought he was doomed because of the a pawn, which I believe might be correct. Actually, he could be doomed here with best play after f5. So let's see what could have happened. E takes, g takes. Now white can either take on d3. Let's add some more lines, because I think the logical thing we want to do is push the pawn or do something related to the pawn. So bishop d8 is coming in strongest. Forget the d pawn. Bishop d8. Let's drag that pawn. Bishop b6. Bishop c6, kicking the knight. And look, white's advantage all of a sudden is gone up massively. Say knight moves. Oh, sorry. Oh, of course, that's winning material now, because if the knight moves, then bishop d4 check. So this is a tactical disaster. Okay, sorry, forget the last move then. Here, say bishop e5, then the pawn's dragging forward, and he's winning a whole bishop, and he can win that position, of course. Two bishops versus and the pawn versus the knights and the two pawns. He can win that quite easily. So the pawn is being dragged forward by force, it seems. Was that the most accurate? Bishop e7. Engines are given also bishop d6 and a6 for dragging the pawn forward. So it was interesting to see bishop e7. If bishop d6, this is another method. So let's see, knight g1. Can we do bishop b8 just to play a6 a7? That seems simple enough as well. Isn't a6 just winning if we just wanted to keep with the theme? a7, isn't that good enough? Forget the other moves for a moment. No, apparently knight f2 check. No, there's a reason to take on d3 here to avoid knight f2 and losing the e-pawn. You can keep a7 in reserve, no rush. Okay, so it seems to be a winning position just because of the passed a-pawn. So simplicity after the storm. So maybe, you know, he did visualize inviting a few forcing moves here for the resulting position for this outside pass pawn to be a potentially winning trump card in the position, which it does turn out to be. It's really making use of that 2-to-1 pawn majority. So previously in the game, b4 had been strongly guarded against and blockaded, and in the end game things had loosened up for b4 to become possible for white with great effect, huge effect, with different ways of queening that pawn here. So apparently there was a bit of a laugh as well at this move f5. I think both players were sort of laughing, and anyway, Svidler resigned. Okay, or maybe just Ivanchuk was laughing, actually, to be more precise. Okay, let's go back in overview and summary anyway. So a strange way of playing the Gruenfeld, slightly strange I find, to play e3 and these queen moves, these odd queen moves. Okay, this seems to have a logic to it. But then, you know, the check and then going back to b3, okay. Where else though? A3, then there's knight c2 check. d1 seems a bit defeatist. He's keeping the pressure on the knight. There's no a4 because of queen b4. So it's illogical playing the exact position again to put the queen here back on b3. And there's pressure, of course, on d5. So that did prompt maybe this idea of releasing the tension in the centre. And black, okay, although he's giving white the bishop here, you know, it's a lot of play for black here. What was mysterious was this pawn sack that happened. This pawn sacrifice, which could have been followed up here with knight a4 from an engine point of view, which would be sort of going into an equal position. but it was followed up just by losing that pawn. Maybe just Svidler thought he's got enough pressure, dark square blockade would be okay. So what seemed to happen approaching the endgame position here was actually this 2-to-1 pawn majority was able to be utilised at cost of sacrificing the G2 pawn, which was doubled anyway at this point. So the knight's kind of irrelevant at the moment to stopping b4, and we get this kind of winning outside pass pawn scenario now. So after f5, Svidler resigned. Well, I hope you got something from that. I thought it'd be nice to cover some of the decisive games in the Tal Memorial, so I hope you enjoyed it. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.